Start with Peter Thiel. The PayPal co-founder was one of President Trump's most ardent supporters during the 2016 campaign, a political position that was not popular in Silicon Valley. Maria sat down with Thiel for an exclusive, wide-ranging interview, starting with his continued support of the president.
You've spent almost your entire life in Silicon Valley, and you've decided recently to leave Silicon Valley, take your investment firm as well, and open up shop in Los Angeles. Why is this? What caused this?
Well, it's a decision that I've been thinking about for quite some time. On the technology side, I think that Silicon Valley will continue producing great companies, but perhaps not quite as many. For the last 20 years, you had this very strange dynamic where Silicon Valley was the only place where innovation in the United States really happened. And even though the internet was supposed to eliminate the tyranny of place, you somehow had all the internet companies happening in one particular place. And I think my judgment is that this will be much more distributed in the future, much more outside of Silicon Valley. There are certain pluses and minuses to Silicon Valley. The big advantage is that you have all the talent, all the capital in one place, and so you have these extraordinary network effects. And that's been a motor of Silicon Valley for a long time. But there's a point where network effects go very wrong, and where sort of the network effects, the fact that everyone's super connected, everyone knows what everyone's thinking, everyone ends up thinking the same thing, and it sort of shifts over into the madness of crowds. And I think that somehow we've gotten to a point where perhaps the negatives are greater than the positives.
Well, look, I mean, there are a lot of ideologies, and it's sort of one ideology. You backed President Trump in a big way, and Silicon Valley is very liberal. Do you get heat for that? Did you get heat for that?
You know, of course I got heat, and I don't want to exaggerate the importance of that. I think it's okay to be in a place where most people are liberal, or most people have views different from my own. I do think there's something different when it goes from a large majority having one way to it being almost unanimous, where and because things are never unanimous. When people are unanimously on one side, that tells you not that they've all figured out the truth, but that they're in a sort of totalitarian place, that they're in a one-party state where they're not allowed to have dissenting views. And I think somehow Silicon Valley shifted from being, quite liberal to being a one-party state, and those are two very different things.
What can we do about this? It's not just Silicon Valley, right? I mean, you look at universities, they push back on any conservative thinking. You could just pick up and move and take your business with you. But what is the country supposed to do when there's this pushback of a diversity of ideas?
Well, I've often said that our greatest political problem is the problem of political correctness, properly understood, because that's how we limit the debate, how we aren't allowed to consider all the possibilities. And certainly, I think the universities share a lot of blame for this. The education system shares a lot of blame, but I think the pushback is you just have to try to push back in every specific context where you find it, and say the real debate is not this super narrow debate. There's a much broader range of possibilities we should be considering.
Why do you think LA is going to be any better?
I think. Well, I think it might be just as bad if I was trying to become a Hollywood movie star. Not planning to do that.
That's a good point.
I think it is a more diversified economy. So it's not dominated by just one industry. It's you have the entertainment industry, but you also have finance, you have tech, you have sort of a well-diversified economic base, and I think it has much less of this sense of everyone being on top of one another, thinking the same way in one place. It's a very spread out city, which in many ways is a bad thing, but from a traffic point of view, things like that. But I think it makes it much less ideologically homogenous.
Maybe it's more tolerance in terms of different ideas.
I think it is significily more tolerant in San Francisco at this point.
Are you considering creating a new network, a conservative network, a libertarian network?
We've looked at doing something in the media content side for some time. The big challenge is really figuring out how to get the business model to work. The sense is that cable works, but it's not clear that's the future. The future's something that's more internet-centric, but it's still very unclear how one gets the business model to work from the content production side. And so I've spoken to a lot of different people, but I haven't yet figured out that problem.
There's a lot of information out there, and yet, the president termed fake news, and by the way, in a lot of situations, he was right. What's your take on what has taken place around Facebook in terms of the Russia involvement in the election and the advertisements around it?
I think, look, I'm on the Facebook board. I'm going to defend it, and I have to be careful what I say here. I think that Facebook, clearly would have liked to get ahead of this sooner, preferably even before the election, and done something to figure out about how to stop this sort of interference. On the other hand, this was not. I think this was a mistake that's very understandable. It was not generally thought that something like this would happen. And if you remember what happened in the election, it was Trump in September, October of 2016 who said the election was going to get rigged, and it was Obama and Hillary Clinton who said that was ridiculous, that our elections were perfectly run in this country, and that it was outrageous for anyone to even suggest that. And I think the people at Facebook and elsewhere tended to believe what Obama said.
Sure, understandable. Let me move on to President Trump. What did you see in him that made you think that he was going to be a winner? What kind of policies would you like to see? How's he doing?
Well, perhaps the single thing that I saw in President Trump, and that I still think is terrific, is this willingness to challenge some of the orthodoxies, some of the politically correct orthodoxies in our country, and to freshly rethink things in a variety of ways. And I think that's so critical for us moving forward. If you looked at so many of the Republican candidates in the primaries in 2016, they seemed like zombies. They had sort of these rehearsed lines, but they weren't even that good at delivering these zombie-like lines. And I think Trump offered some very fresh energy in that context. And so I think I think in general, the question is how to move beyond the sort of glib globalization that we've been supporting for many decades, and ask some tougher questions about what kinds of policies are more in the interests of the United States, in the interests of U.S. citizens, in the interests of U.S. corporations. And I think that's a reset that's gradually but surely happening.
You're right, and you saw this early on, and it's important because there are a lot of communities in this country that have not been benefiting from some of the things that the globalists have been.
Well, it's even if you look at the big tax reform that was pushed through, it's basically designed to make taxes on American corporations more competitive globally. So you can say that's a way to compete globally, but it's also to be aware that things are not always an even playing field, and that we had gotten to the point where U.S. corporations were paying among the highest taxes in the world. And so if you're going to be globalist, you have to reset them and make them more competitive. So there's all these ways people were globalist but weren't really thinking it through.